In South Carolina, there exists a probate record shrouded in mystery, a document so contentious that it lay sealed for a staggering 83 years. The final wishes of Colonel Augustus Fairmont, penned in March 1857, allocated his entire fortune, worth millions in today's currency, to one sole heir. Not his spouse of 26 years, not his 3 rightful offspring, not his brother who had stood shoulder to shoulder with him in the Mexican War. The only heir to Fairmont's 1,400 acres, her Charleston townhouse, her cotton factoring business, and her substantial investments, was a woman whose name was listed in his ledgers under a much darker classification of property. The reading of that will ignite a fierce legal struggle that would engulf 3 law firms, fracture the fabric of Charleston society, and unearth secrets that influential families had labored for years to conceal. Before we delve deeper into the chilling tale of Augustus Fairmont and the inheritance that was never meant to be, ensure that you are subscribed to Faith and Mystery. Tap that notification bell, as tales like this one remain hidden from history books. Share with us in the comments which state you're tuning in from at this moment. We find it fascinating to learn how our audience uncovers these shadowy aspects of American history. The unsettling nature of the Fairmont case lies not only in the revelations of the will, but also in the dark truths it unearthed about the concealed foundations lurking beneath the facade of Southern gentility. Charleston, during the 1850s, embodied all that the antebellum South wished to project to the world. White columned mansions stood like silent sentinels along the Battery, their piazzas whispering secrets to the harbor breeze. On the eerie Sunday mornings, the haunting chimes of the church bells from Street, Michaels and Street, Phillips summoned the devoted to gather in reverence. As the sun dipped low in the sky, carriages creaked along Meeting Street, transporting elegantly dressed ladies in shimmering silk and dapper gentlemen clad in luxurious broadcloth. The city's riches flowed from rice, from indigo, from sea island cotton fruits of the plantations that stretched across the low country, resembling kingdoms unto themselves. Augustus Fairmont's plantation, Riverside, lay 20 miles inland along the dark waters of the Ashley River. The main house, constructed in the year 1789 by his grandfather, loomed 3 stories high in a Georgian style, its symmetrical and imposing design a testament to permanence. Ancient live oaks, their gnarled branches stretching like skeletal fingers, created a haunting passage from the river road to the front portico. Behind the house loomed the shadowy structures of the working buildings. The kitchen house, the carriage house, the overseer's cottage, and further back, beyond a stand of pines, lay the quarters where nearly 200 souls existed. Bound by the chilling reality of a life that the law deemed mere property ownership, Fairmont himself stood out as a striking presence in the society of Charleston. 47 years old in 1857, he stood over 6 feet tall with the bearing of a military man, which he had been during the Mexican War. He had come back with a medal, and a bullet still stuck close to his spine, causing him to walk with a slight limp when the air turned damp. He served on the vestry of Street Phillips. He was a member of the South Carolina Society, the Hibernian Society, and the Agricultural Society. His thoughts on cotton futures held significant influence on Broad Street. When he addressed public gatherings, discussing the rights of states and the sovereignty of the South, an eerie silence fell over the crowd as they hung on his every word. His wife, Margaret Louisa Fairmont, hailed from the Rutledge family, a lineage steeped in the old Charleston aristocracy, possessing connections that held significant weight. She brought a substantial dowry to the marriage in 1831, 30 enslaved people, $10,000 in railway stock, and the kind of family name that opened doors. She brought forth 3 children for Augustus, who made it past their early years. Catherine, born in the year 1832, Augustus Jr., born in the year 1835, and Margaret, affectionately known as Meg, born in the year 1838. To the outside world, they seemed like the perfect Southern family, wealthy, honorable, and deeply religious. Yet, in the intricate web of Charleston society, such appearances were merely elaborate facades, and the Fairmont household upheld this charade with an unsettling strictness. The household staff at both the plantation and the Charleston townhouse were under the watchful eye of a woman named Celia Russo. She was 28 years old in 1857, unusually light-skinned and literate, a dangerous combination of attributes that would have raised immediate questions in any other household. Fairmont's ledgers recorded her acquisition in the year 1843 from a Savannah estate sale for the astonishing amount of $1,500, 3 times the usual price, With no reason given for the extravagant cost, Celia bore no formal designation, yet she held the reins to Fairmont, oversaw his letters, and resided in a modest room within the main house at Riverside instead of the usual quarters. She adorned herself in simple yet fine materials. She always had that gold locket around her neck, a haunting presence that no one had ever witnessed her without. She spoke with the eloquence of someone who had seen more than her place in the world suggested, gliding through the Fairmont house with a commanding presence that left visitors uneasy and tightened Margaret Fairmont's lips, barely concealing her fury. The society of the plantation held its own silent codes regarding these arrangements. Wealthy men frequently engaged in clandestine affairs, fathering children whose lineage was no secret to anyone. Yet, no one seemed to notice. As long as certain proprieties were upheld, as long as the legal wife held her ground, as long as the offspring of these unions remained shackled, as long as the entire framework lay hidden beneath a veneer of genteel denial, society could continue to operate. Augustus Fairmont had broken each and every one of those rules, though no one yet grasped the full extent of his transgressions. The spring of 1857 ushered in an eerie drought that blanketed the low country. The rice fields that were meant to be submerged lay barren and parched. The prices of cotton had started their gradual descent, a trend that would soon spiral into the chaos of '57 by the time August rolled around. In the drawing rooms of Charleston, whispers of northern aggression began to fill the air more often. To the Dred Scott, a decision was delivered that March, pondering the fate of the Union's survival. The air was thick, weighed down by something sinister lurking just beyond the veil of perception. It bore the burden of a world on the verge of shattering at its core. At Riverside, the tension became deeply personal. Margaret Fairmont had made her way back to Charleston in the cold month of February, bringing along young Mag, and had not set foot back on the plantation since. Catherine, now 25 and still single, had become a source of increasing worry, lingering in the city as shadows deepened around her. Only Augustus Jr., who was honing his skills in his father's cotton factoring business, made rare trips to Riverside, and even he discovered ways to ensure those visits were short-lived. The household at Riverside was made up mainly of Augustus, Celia, the field workers, and the close-knit house staff. In this time of quiet seclusion, Augustus Fairmont started to set in motion plans that would completely upend all that his family believed about what lay ahead for them. On the chilling evening of the 14th of March, in the year 1857, Augustus Fairmont summoned his attorney, Josiah Prescott, to the eerie grounds of Riverside in Charleston. The note brought by a reliable courier warned that Prescott must arrive by himself, armed with the essential tools to craft a complicated testamentary document. Prescott, who had devoted a decade and a half to the Fairmont family, sensed that the request was peculiar, yet it did not raise any immediate alarms. Affluent individuals frequently revised their last testament. What he did not expect was the chilling scene he stumbled upon in Fairmont's study 2 days later. Prescott would later recount in court that he reached Riverside on the afternoon of the 16th of March to discover Fairmont in clear physical agony. The colonel slumped in his mahogany chair, his face a mask of weariness, one hand clutching his aching lower back. A decanter of whiskey loomed at his elbow, a stark contrast for a man who usually sipped with restraint. Most striking was Celia's presence in the room, not serving, not waiting for instructions, but seated in the leather chair typically reserved for business associates, her hands folded in her lap, her expression calm and collected. "Sir, I think it might be wise to summon Dr. Middleton," Prescott remarked, observing the glistening sweat on Fairmont's brow, an unsettling contrast to the chill of the March air. "No doctors," Fairmont's voice emerged, rough yet resolute. "I am fully aware of the darkness that resides within me, Josiah, and no healer can mend this affliction. I require you to draft a will this evening, and it must be executed precisely as I instruct, regardless of any advice your expertise may offer." Prescott cast a wary eye at Celia, her very being twisting the atmosphere into something profoundly unsettling. "Colonel, in situations like these, I require witnesses who possess the ability to read and write, individuals who can vouch for my mental clarity," Fairmont cut in. "Celia is among the sharpest minds I've encountered. She will bear witness. Among my people, there are 2 others who possess the ability to sign their names. I have already taken care of it." The attorney felt a deep unease, yet Fairmont held a position of considerable importance. Prescott slowly opened his case, the creaking sound echoing in the dim light as he carefully arranged his materials, each item a whisper of the dark tale that awaited. What followed was a dictation that would take nearly 3 hours, interrupted frequently by Fairmont's pauses to grapple with what was clearly considerable pain. The will started off in a typical manner, with the usual affirmations of mental and physical soundness, although the latter seemed rather exaggerated, followed by the cancellation of all earlier testaments. Then arrived the changes that would alter everything. "With a heavy heart, I bestow upon Celia Russo," Fairmont declared, his voice steady, even as pain coursed through him. "At Riverside Plantation, she is regarded as property. Yet upon my passing, she will gain her immediate and unconditional freedom. All necessary documents will be provided to affirm her status as a free woman of color in accordance with the laws of South Carolina and the United States." Prescott's pen lingered in the air, caught in a moment of uncertainty. In the shadows of legal documents, manumission clauses lurked within wills, their presence growing rarer as the tightening grip of state law cast a dark pall over their existence. Yet Fairmont was only at the start of its dark tale. I further give and bequeath to the aforementioned Celia Russo, now to be known as Celia Russo Fairmont, the entirety of Riverside Plantation, including all lands, buildings, equipment, livestock, and all individuals currently held in bondage thereon. I further bequeath to her my townhouse at 14 Trad Street in Charleston, along with all furnishings and household goods contained within. The scratching of the pen came to a complete halt. "Colonel, I must strongly advise you," wrote Josiah. Fairmont's voice sliced through the air, a chilling command that left no room for dissent. "I further bequeath to Celia Russo Fairmont all shares and interests in the firm of Fairmont and Lazarus Cotton Factors, all railway stock, all bank deposits, all bonds and securities, and all personal property of every kind and description. I designate her as the sole executor of my final will and testament, granting her complete authority to act without the need for a bond or court supervision." The room had descended into an eerie silence, broken only by the scratching of Prescott's pen and the haunting melodies drifting from the distant quarters as night fell. Celia remained motionless, her expression betraying no hint of emotion. As Augustus spoke of my wife, Margaret Louisa Fairmont, each word felt like a heavy burden weighing down on him. "I hereby grant her the legal minimum, dear, right required under South Carolina law, 1/3 of my real property for her natural life. However, Dare stated that right would be under the primary ownership and management of Celia Russo Fairmont, and that Margaret Louisa Fairmont would have no say in the administration of any property at all." Prescott had ceased, even the facade of writing. "Colonel, your spouse is shielded by the law. Your little ones hold dreams and hopes. This will not hold up in a court of law. Beyond the barriers imposed by society, a woman of color finds herself unable to claim ownership. Put it all on paper, Josiah. Precisely as I express it. There exist paths that circumvent the legal barriers, and you are well aware of them. Property may be kept in a trust. Plans can be set in motion. I have delved into the intricacies of the law. I'm not the first man to attempt to care for those I love." He came to a halt. His breathing was heavy and strained. "I recognize Celia's son Daniel, who came into this world on the 12th day of June in the year 1844, as my own flesh and blood. I decree that he shall be brought up as a free man, granted all the opportunities that life can offer him." The silence that enveloped the room after this statement felt as if it were suffocating the very air in the study. Daniel was 13 years old in 1857, a boy toiling in the Riverside stables, and he bore such a striking resemblance to Augustus Fairmont that only a deliberate refusal to see could deny the bond between them. The written acknowledgment laid bare the unuttered expectations of society, a haunting truth that lingered in the shadows. "Furthermore," Augustus said, his voice weakening, "I acknowledge Celia's daughter, Ruth, born on the 3rd day of April in the year 1847, as my natural child, and I direct that she be raised with the same advantages. 2 children, not just a single mistake, but a continuous bond lasting over a decade, resulting in offspring who bore the same blood as the rightful Fairmont heirs, yet had spent their entire existence shackled by the very man who should have been their protector." Prescott discovered his voice. "Colonel, I cannot, in good faith, let you move forward without grasping the repercussions that await. Your spouse will challenge this right away. Your children will never come to terms with it. The Charleston Society shall. The Society of Charleston Augustus interjected with a surprising malice, having constructed its wealth on a foundation of calculated violation, referring to it as breeding stock. Every elegant home on the Battery harbors children whose fathers possess them. Every esteemed gentleman engages in commerce during daylight hours, yet under the cover of darkness, he betrays those he professes to own. The sole distinction, Josiah, is that I am speaking the truth regarding it. In my legal writing, I am capturing the secrets that every man in Charleston harbors when the night falls. He leaned forward, and the effort was evident on his face. I am perishing. Josiah, Dr. Middleton told me half a year ago that the cancer spreading from my bowels would kill me within the year. I've kept it a secret from everyone, but not from Celia. I might have just a few weeks left, maybe even fewer. And I cannot depart from this world knowing that my own offspring will be bartered to pay off my debts, or that the woman I should have had the bravery to wed openly will be cast back into servitude when I take my last breath. The confession lingered in the atmosphere, thick and suffocating like a cloud of dark smoke. Prescott's hands quivered ever so slightly as he picked up the pen once more, the shadows around him deepening with each stroke. For the next couple of hours, they toiled over the intricate details, the trust agreements that could withstand legal scrutiny, the particular gifts intended to ensure quick access to cash, the meticulous phrasing that sought to navigate the complexities of South Carolina law concerning property rights and freedom. As the document reached its final form, Fairmont felt an overwhelming urge to read it himself. His finger traced each line, a testament to his determination, even as the effort brought him sharp pangs of discomfort. Then he signed it with a steady hand, the signature eerily familiar, just like the one he'd scrawled on countless business documents before. Celia signed as a witness, her handwriting reflecting a refined education and meticulous precision. Two other enslaved individuals from the plantation, a man named Samuel, who worked as a blacksmith and had taught himself to read, and a woman named Hannah, who had learned her letters from a former mistress, were also brought in to bear witness. Prescott observed their marks and signatures, a chill creeping over him as discomfort settled in his bones. "I'll file this with my other documents," Prescott said, his voice steady as he readied himself to depart. "But, Colonel, I implore you to think again. At the very least, ensure that you offer more support for your rightful offspring. Offer a subtle sign that could ease their reaction. My true children," Augustus said, and his voice carried a weight of endless fatigue, "will inherit the shield of their mother's lineage, the education I have already funded, and the societal standing that accompanies fair skin in Charleston. Daniel and Ruth will gain nothing but their freedom if I don't take action immediately. The law views them as mere objects, Josiah. Possessions I have, items that could be traded away to satisfy my creditors if I fail to secure this deal." He gazed at Celia in that moment, and an unspoken connection flickered between them that Prescott found impossible to define. "I have existed as a timid soul. Allow me to meet my end with integrity." That evening, Prescott left Riverside clutching a document that held the power to ruin countless lives, perhaps even his own career. He rode back to Charleston through the suffocating darkness, wrestling with the unsettling thought of whether he had a duty to reveal to Margaret Fairmont the sinister actions of her husband. He chose, maybe out of his own fear, that the shield of attorney-client privilege kept him from uttering a word. His silence was the very thing that let the situation spiral into a catastrophe beyond imagination. Augustus Fairmont lived for another 6 weeks. As the days passed, he lingered at Riverside, his health slipping away with each moment. Celia cared for him as his pain grew more intense, giving him laudanum when the agony became too much to bear, and in the evenings, she read to him from the familiar books they had seemingly cherished together for years. The past, the essence of thought, the beauty of verse. Daniel and Ruth were granted the chance to see their father freely in his last days, a sight that shocked the white overseers, yet none of them had the courage to challenge it, considering Fairmont's terrifying reputation, even as it waned. Margaret Fairmont chose not to visit. It remains a mystery whether she had caught wind of her husband's plight and decided to keep her distance, or if Augustus had intentionally kept the truth from her. The annals of history offer no clarity on this unsettling question. Yet she lingered in Charleston, participating in social gatherings, upholding the illusion that her husband was merely preoccupied with plantation affairs amidst the challenging farming season. Augustus Fairmont met his end on the fateful morning of the 28th of April in the year 1857. Celia stood by his side in those final moments. As recounted by the staff who remained in the house, his final utterance was, "Convey the truth. Everything." The truth, when it finally surfaced, would unleash a devastation beyond anything he could have ever imagined. The chilling news of Colonel Fairmont's demise swept through Charleston on that very day. According to the established norms and traditions, Margaret welcomed guests who came to express their sympathies at the TD Street house. She donned black silk, welcomed visitors into the parlor, and received their condolences with a grace that masked her inner turmoil. All who witnessed her were struck by her calmness, by the resilience she showed during her darkest hour. Unbeknownst to her, she had already lost it all. The reading of the will was set for the 3rd of May, 5 days after Augustus's death, and just 1 day following his burial in St. Philip's churchyard. This burial, which Margaret had insisted be carried out with the utmost care, was overshadowed by her private rage at her husband's prolonged absence and unexpected demise. She had extended the invitation solely to family and a few trusted friends, including her brother, James Rutledge, and her children. Augustus's brother, William, along with a handful of family friends who had taken on the role of informal advisors throughout the years. Josiah Prescott arrived at the Tradd Street house at 10 in the morning, carrying the will and wearing the expression of a man walking to his own execution. He had attempted on 2 occasions to meet with Margaret in private before this moment, hoping to prepare her, but she had been too consumed with the funeral arrangements to spare him a moment. Now he found himself facing the daunting task of delivering the news in front of an audience, with all eyes upon him. Margaret nestled into the grandest chair in the drawing room, her children gathered closely around her. Catherine, at 25, had never married, despite her mother's relentless attempts. A source of relentless unease that grew darker when Augustus turned away from offering a proper diary for the matches Margaret had meticulously planned. Augustus Jr., 22, toiled in his father's cotton factoring business, believing he would one day claim both the firm and the sprawling plantation. Young Mag, 19, sat with her hands folded, still the beautiful daughter. The air was thick with the scent of furniture polish, mingling with the fragrance of flowers that had been sent in a steady stream since the tragic news of Augustus's passing. Spring sunlight poured through the towering windows that gazed out over the garden. All seemed refined, structured, and in its rightful place. Prescott swallowed hard, the sound echoing in the stillness. "Mrs. Fairmont, dear family, I must start by revealing that the details of Colonel Fairmont's final will and testament are quite peculiar. I cautioned against numerous stipulations, yet the colonel remained resolute, and in my professional opinion, he was of sound mind as he articulated his desires." Margaret's face hinted that this introduction was superfluous. "My husband was always meticulous about his dealings. Mr. Prescott, you may now begin the reading." The events that unfolded would haunt the memories of all who witnessed them, lingering in their minds forever. Prescott hurriedly skimmed through the initial passages. The usual legal wording, the cancellation of earlier wills. Then he reached the significant gifts. His voice grew tight as he uttered the words that set Celia free, that recognized Daniel and Ruth as Augustus's true heirs, that handed over the whole estate to a woman who had been considered property when the will was penned. The response did not come right away. For a few agonizing moments, the room hung in a heavy silence as the gathered family struggled to comprehend the chilling words that had just pierced the air. Catherine's brow furrowed, her expression a mix of bewilderment and disbelief, as though she had caught a whisper of something sinister lurking just out of reach. Augustus Jr. leaned forward, his face pale. James Rutledge clutched the arms of his chair tightly. Margaret Fairmont froze in place. Then Augustus Jr. burst apart. "This is utterly ridiculous. It's a deception. My father would never do such a thing. He could not have. Your father spoke these words to me himself." Prescott whispered softly. "I saw his signature come to life before my eyes. The document has been carefully signed, with several witnesses present to bear witness to its authenticity. Are there any witnesses?" James Rutledge's voice sliced through the turmoil. "What witnesses are there? Who would bear witness to such a chilling account?" As Prescott revealed that the witnesses comprised enslaved individuals capable of reading and writing, including Celia herself, the atmosphere in the room ignited with shock and disbelief. A crowd of voices rose together, overlapping in a cacophony of sound. Augustus Jr. rose to his feet, pacing back and forth, his hands tightly balled into fists. Catherine's tears flowed freely, while Margaret sat still, her silence heavy in the air. Her expression shifted, revealing not surprise, but a chilling affirmation of fears she had harbored for so long. At last, she lifted a hand, and an eerie silence enveloped the room. When she spoke, her voice held the chilling clarity of a blade honed to perfection. How many moments must pass? Prescott's eyes fluttered open. I apologize, Mrs. Fairmont. How long has my husband been involved in this relationship with his possession? The lawyer paused, uncertainty flickering in their eyes. The will acknowledges children born in 1844 and 1847, 13 years, Margaret whispered gently. My youngest daughter entered this world in the year 1838, marking the passage of 19 years since we exchanged our vows. As I carried his children, ran our home, and upheld his status in the community, he struggled to control himself, the effort evident in his demeanor. And this woman, this Celia, she now possesses my dwelling. The will grants your dear right 1/3 of the real property for your lifetime. Under her control and guidance, she possesses the dwelling. I filled the plantation with furnishings. I played a part in constructing the business. My dowry assisted in the establishment. Margaret's voice had fallen to a haunting whisper, a sound that felt far more dreadful than any scream could have conveyed. And my children received nothing. Prescott found himself at a loss, unable to find words that could ease the impending dread. According to the terms laid out in Augustus Fairmont's will, his rightful offspring were left with no direct inheritances. They possessed no rights to the plantation, the properties in Charleston, the business ventures, or even the personal belongings of their father. All that once belonged to them had now passed into the hands of Celia and her little ones. Augustus Jr. discovered his voice. This is the haunting retribution of slavery. My father has lost his mind. He must be suffering from some affliction of the mind. Prescott stated with conviction that your father was completely aware and in control of his senses. He knew precisely what he was doing. He declared with chilling clarity that he was righting a wrong. Unfairness. Catherine's voice grew louder. He has turned us into beggars. We possess nothing. How can I possibly wed without any dowry? How will Augustus carve out his place in the world of business? How is a mother to survive? The dear right provides. The dire situation allows us to exist as dependents in our own home, under the whims of a woman who was once considered property. James Rutledge stood now, his voice trembling with fury. This is utterly unacceptable. It is against the law. A woman of color is unable to possess property in South Carolina, except in the most restricted circumstances. Prescott stated that the property is secured in trust, with arrangements that he believes will endure any legal scrutiny. Colonel Fairmont delved deeply into the law, meticulously crafting these provisions with care. Margaret rose, and an unsettling shift in her demeanor hushed the room, leaving an eerie stillness in its wake. Where is she at this moment? Mrs. Fairmont, where is the woman who has stolen my very existence? Prescott's hesitation was palpable. She stays at Riverside with the children, as the will dictates, and it is her rightful place. Her right. Margaret tasted the words as if they were poison. Deliver a message to her. Inform her that the family wants to talk about the conditions laid out in the will. Inform her that we might be ready to find a resolution that could spare us from the grimness of a public confrontation. Whisper it to her. She hesitated, and her grin was unsettling. Convey to her that I long to encounter the other family of my husband. That afternoon, the message found its way to Riverside. Celia's reply came the following morning. She would arrive in Charleston, but only if she had a lawyer by her side. She proposed they gather at Prescott's office instead of the Trad Street house, firmly stating that Daniel and Ruth should join her, for they deserved to be part of the conversation just as much as Augustus's rightful heirs. The proposed meeting was scheduled for the 8th of May. In the 5 days between Margaret's discovery of the will and that fateful meeting, Charleston society ignited with whispers of scandal. Whispers slithered through the shadows, carried by the very hands that served the household. Was it Margaret's allies, scheming in the dark? Or was it the nature of such colossal secrets that rendered them impossible to keep? The truth, like a creeping dread, seeped into the air, leaving no corner untouched. As the first week of May drew to a close, whispers echoed through the upper echelons of Charleston society. Colonel Augustus Fairmont had made a shocking decision in his will. He had liberated his enslaved mistress, recognized their children, and turned his back on his white family to ensure their future. The responses divided in ways that were all too familiar. A wave of anger surged for Margaret, as people labeled Augustus's actions a deep betrayal of all that civilized society cherished. How could a man of his stature, his esteemed reputation, his prominent position, descend into such darkness? Some, especially the younger men, murmured that Augustus had merely revealed what many in Charleston secretly engaged in. Only a mere handful, had the courage to propose that there might be something commendable in a man striving to care for the children he had brought into the world, no matter the color of their mother's skin. Yet, lurking beneath the surface of all the conversations was a profound sense of dread. If Augustus Fairmont, a man of respect, wealth, and connections, could pull off such a feat, what did that reveal about the fragility of other alliances? How many other white families could end up being uprooted by the very individuals they had once held in chains? The will stood as a grave breach of the unspoken codes that kept the Southern society in its delicate balance. It needed to be confronted, needed to be vanquished, or the consequences would seep through society like a relentless plague. The meeting on the 8th of May unfolded in Josiah Prescott's office on Broad Street, within a room that felt suffocatingly cramped for the throng of people who packed into it. Margaret was the first to arrive, accompanied by her brother James, her children, and 2 additional solicitors she had brought along, experts in probate law hailing from well-known Charleston families. They gathered on one side of the lengthy table that loomed over the room. As Celia stepped inside, the atmosphere shifted instantly, sending a chill through the air. She donned a dress of deep gray wool, unadorned yet expertly crafted, featuring a stark white collar. Her hair was drawn back tightly. She moved with an unsettling calmness, stepping into a space crowded with souls who longed for her downfall. At the age of 13, Daniel donned a suit that seemed crafted just for him. Not the drab attire of a servant, but rather the refined garb befitting the son of a gentleman. Ruth, at 10, donned a blue dress with meticulous stitches, her hair arranged in tidy braids. The 2 children clearly shared the unmistakable Fairmont traits, particularly Daniel, who had Augustus's strong jawline and those hauntingly deep-set eyes. The instant Margaret Fairmont and Celia Russo locked eyes from opposite sides of the table, the weight of their shared past hung thick in the air, far beyond what any written record could convey. For 14 long years, these 2 women coexisted within the same walls, one reigning as the mistress, the other bound as mere property. Both had given life to Augustus Fairmont's offspring. In their own unique ways, they had each constructed their existence around a man who had ensnared them in isolated realms that were never meant to collide. Now those worlds had collided, and one of them would be obliterated in the aftermath. Margaret spoke first, her voice steady, yet sharp like the sound of ice fracturing. "Do you get it? And I believe that my husband's will cannot hold up, that the law safeguards a wife's rights, and that no court in South Carolina would permit such a horror." Celia locked eyes with her, intentionally breaking the unspoken rules that dictated how a woman of color ought to interact with a white woman, particularly someone of Margaret's stature. Your husband decided to face the reality that lurked in the shadows. At last, the straightforward declaration struck with the force of a tangible impact. Margaret's calm facade began to falter, a flush creeping into her cheeks. "You lured him in, wielding your influence in his home to control a man who I was just 14 when your husband bought me in Savannah." Celia's voice held steady, yet it pulsed with a growing intensity. 14. "I did not entice anyone, Mrs. Fairmont. My former mistress taught me the art of reading and writing, a skill that transformed me into a prized asset within the household. That's what your husband whispered to the shadows. He acquired me to uncover the dark secrets behind my other purposes, what I was forced to confront. I trust you can picture it in your mind." The room had fallen into a chilling silence. Augustus Jr. slowly lifted himself from his chair, a sense of unease creeping into the air around him, but James Rutledge clutched his arm, restraining him from moving forward. "You will not speak to my mother like that," Catherine said, her voice trembling with a mix of fear and anger. "You have no claim to that. I hold every right within my grasp." Celia turned to Catherine, her voice now laced with an unyielding edge. I possess the entitlement that your father bestowed upon me in his final testament. I possess the same rights as one who tended to your home, nurtured your little ones in their early days, maintained your father's accounts, handled his business matters during his absences, and brought forth his offspring, just as your mother did. The sole distinction lies in the fact that I endured it all without any choice, stripped of legal protection, and devoid of the power to refuse. And now your father has attempted to grant me what he should have bestowed upon me 13 years ago, my freedom and the means to safeguard my children. Margaret's attorney, a man with silver hair named Bogart Simmons, interjected. Miss Russo, your past, though tragic, holds no bearing on the legal matters we are currently facing. Colonel Fairmont's will breaks several rules set forth by the laws of South Carolina. The transfer of property in this way is not permissible for a woman of color. Children born to a mother who is enslaved are doomed to a life of bondage and are unable to claim any inheritance. The dear rights of the legal wife take precedence over any testamentary provisions that might suggest otherwise. This will is not legally valid for several reasons. So, what's the purpose of this meeting then? Celia inquired. If you truly believe the will is not valid, why not just take it to court? Simmons and James Rutland shared a fleeting, uneasy look. The reality was far murkier than Celia's inquiry implied, and all those present were acutely aware of it. The legal landscape surrounding property rights and race in 1857 South Carolina was a tangled web of contradictions. Though the law imposed harsh limitations on what free people of color could possess or receive, it simultaneously acknowledged trusts, accepted private agreements, and, most importantly, affirmed that white men of wealth enjoyed specific advantages in managing their estates. Augustus had meticulously crafted the will, employing legal strategies meant to withstand any scrutiny. Above all, a public court battle would lay bare secrets that neither family wished to have scrutinized. James Rutland let out a low, raspy sound from his throat. We've gathered here, Miss Russo, because even though this document holds no legal weight, we understand that dragging this matter through the courts would be a nightmare for everyone concerned. The secrets of my brother-in-law's private life would soon be laid bare for all to see. Names would be spoken. The children would be watched closely. We are ready to present you with a settlement that will secure a future for you and your children, sparing you from the need for a lengthy legal battle. How generous, Celia said, her voice dripping with barely concealed sarcasm. What are the conditions of this agreement? Margaret leaned in closer. You are granted your freedom, something the law would probably bestow upon you anyway. You receive $20,000, enough to establish yourself and your children comfortably anywhere in the North, where attitudes towards your situation might be more accommodating. In return, you forfeit any rights to the Fairmont properties and the business interests, and you must depart from South Carolina within 30 days. The offer was significant in terms of money. $20,000 represented significant wealth. Yet, it was merely a sliver of the estate's true value, and all present were acutely aware of this unsettling truth. What loomed larger than anything else was the necessity for Celia to leave the South behind, to uproot her children from the only home they had ever known, to embrace exile as the cost of their liberation. Your husband left me everything, because he understood the fate that awaited me and my children if he chose otherwise, Celia whispered, her voice trembling. He understood that once he took his last breath, I would be exposed, that someone might attempt to trade me away to clear their obligations, or that your relatives would seek to eliminate me. He understood that Daniel and Ruth, his beloved children, would be seen as mere possessions, ready to be cast aside. He spent 6 weeks dying in agony, Mrs. Fairmont, and during that time, he made sure we would be safe. I can't imagine he would want me to take 30 pieces of silver and vanish into the shadows. How could you possibly have the audacity to recite scripture in my presence? Margaret's voice fell to a whisper, sharp and menacing. You, the one who shattered my marriage, who took refuge in my homes, who brought forth children with my husband while she, ceased her struggle for control. The fight fading from her eyes. Catherine gently rested her hand on her mother's arm. Mother, I beg you. But Margaret pushed her away. No, I have remained quiet for far too long, bending to the shadows, pretending to be the perfect wife while my husband's betrayal unfolded right beneath my own roof. She focused entirely on Celia, and in that moment, the hurt hidden beneath the fury became starkly apparent. Did you truly love him? The question lingered, turning the legal negotiation into a more visceral and human experience. Celia's calm facade finally began to shatter, just a little. I was 14 when he purchased me Mrs. Fairmont. I discovered the art of survival. I'm not sure if what I felt was love, or just a desperate instinct to shield myself and my children from the darkness that lurked around us. Yet, I understand that he offered me the sole gift within his grasp, the opportunity to escape the chains of ownership. And I understand that if I give that up now, my children will live their lives exposed to anyone who thinks their freedom is a nuisance. Josiah Prescott, who had kept his lips sealed during the entire conversation, finally broke his silence. Maybe we should turn our attention to the little ones. Without a doubt, both families must come to a consensus that the well-being of these young individuals, every single one of them, should take precedence above all else. My children's welfare, Margaret said with a chilling detachment, is in grave danger because of this will. My son struggles to find his footing in the business world without the necessary funds. My daughters are unable to secure suitable marriages without dowries. The children of this woman were brought into a world of bondage, destined to remain shackled by the very laws that govern their existence. After a long stretch of silence, Daniel finally broke the stillness that had enveloped the meeting. His voice was youthful, yet unwavering. I am 13 years old. Throughout my existence, I have been nothing more than a possession. I have seen my mother cater to those who possessed her. I have toiled in stables with men who seemed ready to be traded away at any instant. I have a sister who is just a decade old, yet she understands that her life could be traded like a commodity. He was my father, and there was no denying it. Everyone could see it. Everyone has always felt it lurking in the shadows. My father endeavored to provide us with what you often overlook, the right to possess our very beings. What kind of justice is it to strip that away? The bluntness of the words spoken by a child, who had been powerless in all of this, cast a heavy stillness over the room. Augustus Jr. gazed at Daniel, perhaps for the first time recognizing him as a half-brother instead of mere property. He seemed on the verge of speaking, but his mother's piercing glare quickly silenced him. Justice Margaret stated that true justice is not achieved by sacrificing one family for the gain of another. Mr. Simmons, what steps should we take next regarding the legal challenge? Simmons laid out the plan. They would submit their case for probate in the Court of Common Pleas, contending that the will breached public policy, surpassed the testator's legal power to allocate property to individuals of color, and encroached upon Margaret's dear rights. Witnesses would be summoned to recount Augustus's strange actions during his last weeks, hinting at a decline in his mental state. They would claim that Celia had exerted excessive influence over a man on the brink of death. As Simmons spoke, Celia's attorney, a man named Thomas Grimbaugh, one of the rare lawyers in Charleston brave enough to tackle such a contentious case, scribbled down notes. Grimbaugh held steadfast Quaker beliefs, standing firmly against slavery due to his faith. He was prepared to endure social rejection, as he sought to confront this injustice through legal means whenever he could. The Fairmont case offered him exactly that chance. The gathering ended without any consensus. The clash would shift to the courtroom, and all those gathered sensed the weight of what that entailed. Countless months, or even years of grueling litigation, staggering legal expenses, and the haunting certainty that Charleston society would have to confront unsettling questions it would rather keep buried. As they exited Prescott's office, Margaret and Celia brushed past one another, mere inches apart at the door. Margaret halted, pivoted, and whispered in a tone so faint that it reached only Celia's ears. He whispered your name as he took his last breath, didn't he? Not my own. Not the children's. Yours forever. Celia locked eyes with her. Indeed. Margaret's face twisted in anguish for a fleeting moment before she regained her composure and strode away, her children and lawyers following in her wake. It was the final moment when the two women would exchange words face to face. The legal battle that ensued would engulf Charleston society for the next year and a half, revealing far more than anyone could have foreseen. The case of Fairmont versus Fairmont Estates stepped into the Court of Common Pleas on the 15th day of May in the year 1857. Judge Hamilton Pinckney, a notable figure with 3 decades of experience on the bench and deep connections to Charleston's planter elite, would take the lead. His first ruling on the preliminary motion hinted at the direction the storm would take. He allowed Margaret's lawyers considerable freedom to challenge the will's legitimacy, yet he limited Grimaud's chance to present any evidence regarding Augustus's thoughts or intentions. Yet, the timing of the case revealed its significance in ways that no one could have anticipated at first. The dread of 1857 descended that August, ignited by the collapse of the Ohio Life Insurance and Trust Company. Financial institutions crumbled throughout the nation. Funds vanished into thin air. The prices of cotton, which were already on a downward trend, have now taken a nosedive. Companies that appeared stable in the month of May found themselves crumbling into bankruptcy by September. The financial crisis struck Charleston with a brutal force, leaving the Fairmont business interests in a state of devastation. Augustus found himself in a precarious situation, not overly burdened by the norms of his era, yet the abrupt tightening of credit unleashed a wave of troubles that he could not ignore. Fairmont and Lazarus, the cotton factoring firm, had granted credit to many planters based on their anticipated autumn harvests. As cotton prices plummeted, the planters found themselves unable to settle their debts, leading Fairmont and Lazarus into a dark abyss where they too could not meet their obligations to creditors. The firm's lines of credit with the banks in Charleston were suddenly revoked. The railway stock that had once appeared to be a reliable investment plummeted in value by a staggering 80%, almost as if it had been cursed, vanishing into the shadows overnight. As the month of October and the year 1857 approached, Riverside Plantation found itself staring down the chilling prospect of foreclosure. The Charleston townhouse leaned ominously, as if it held secrets of its own. Even Margaret's dear rights would be meaningless if the properties were sold to appease creditors, and according to Augustus's will, Celia Russo was the rightful owner tasked with navigating this financial nightmare. The scenario twisted the usual flow into something eerily unsettling. Celia, caught in the shadows of her mana mission, wielded power over assets valued in the hundreds of thousands, yet she bore the weight of debts that loomed like a dark cloud, threatening to unravel everything she held dear. She held the power to decide the fate of the estate, yet wielding that authority required maneuvering through a realm that deeply denied the notion that a person like her could hold such strength. She caught everyone off guard, collaborating with Thomas Grimble and a tight-knit circle of Charleston entrepreneurs who recognized a chance for profit even in the face of moral dilemmas. Celia started to make cold and calculated financial choices. She parted ways with the railway stock just in time before it could plunge any deeper into despair. She struck deals with creditors face to face, proposing a fraction of immediate payment in return for absolving the rest, capitalizing on the frantic urgency for any semblance of cash flow. She slashed expenses at Riverside, trimming down the household staff and merging operations into a more streamlined entity. Most controversially, she sold 40 individuals from the Riverside workforce to a Mississippi planter for cash that enabled her to settle urgent debts. The sale kept the looming shadow of foreclosure at bay, yet it laid bare the stark reality of her situation, an insurmountable challenge that loomed over her like a dark cloud. A woman, once a captive herself, found herself in a harrowing position where she had to betray others, selling them into a life of servitude, all in a desperate bid to safeguard her own freedom and secure a future for her children. No one overlooked the moral complexity, especially not Celia. James Worth, a man sold to Mississippi, was 26 years old and had spent his whole life at Riverside. Many years later, while recounting his experiences to representatives of Freedmen's Bureau during the Reconstruction, he vividly remembered the day of the sale. Miss Celia gathered us all in the garden. She was weeping. She whispered her apologies, claiming there was no other way. If the bank seized the plantation, we would all be sold off, scattered like lost souls to whoever had the means to purchase us. She claimed she was doing everything in her power to hold families together, as much as she possibly could. The man from Mississippi vowed to keep married couples together, never to tear them apart. She claimed to understand the sensation of being traded away. Then she looked at me, and I realized she understood everything. A wave of hatred surged within me, and I lashed out at her for it. Confusion enveloped my heart. For the woman who was now selling me had been a victim, just like I had been, only 6 months prior. The sales brought in just enough money to keep the estate from falling into darkness. Yet, they also provided Margaret's lawyers with formidable leverage. How could a woman who professes to embody Augustus's moral vision betray that very principle by trading in human lives for profit? How could she assert that she was worthy of the estate when her initial impulse was to sell it off? Grimaud possessed a response, and it was utterly catastrophic. Mrs. Margaret Fairmont and her children have always accepted the institution of slavery, without question. They have never dared to question the morality of trading in human lives. Their disapproval of Miss Russo isn't rooted in the fact that she sold enslaved individuals to preserve the estate. It's the fact that she, having endured the chains of enslavement herself, dared to make that choice. Their dispute goes beyond questions of right and wrong. It's a tale of who holds the authority to wield power. And their stance is that authority can never be entrusted to someone who resembles Miss Russo, regardless of what the law or the wishes of the departed may indicate. The dispute pushed the situation into a realm that left everyone feeling uneasy. The high society of Charleston preferred to avoid confronting the unsettling contradictions of slavery in the glaring light of the courtroom. They avoided the uncomfortable truth of why it was deemed acceptable for white men to father children with enslaved women, yet utterly unacceptable to recognize those very children. They feared the sharp intellect of a Quaker lawyer dissecting the justifications that enabled so-called civilized Christians to engage in the horrors of human enslavement. Yet, as the case trudged onwards through the chilling months of autumn and the bleak winter of 1857, that scrutiny became inescapable. The witness testimony turned out to be shockingly intense. Margaret's lawyers summoned the housekeepers and overseers from Riverside to share their accounts regarding Celia's role within the household, aiming to prove that she had wielded excessive influence over Augustus. What emerged instead was a haunting depiction of a relationship, far more intricate than either side dared to confront. Sarah Yates, who had spent 2 decades as a cook at Riverside, recounted how Colonel Fairmont frequently engaged in discussions about business with Celia. She held on to his books. She penned his letters. In his absence, she took it upon herself to make choices regarding the plantation. Everyone felt her authority, even if it was never officially acknowledged. Under the piercing gaze of Grimble, Yates faced a chilling inquiry. Did Colonel Fairmont seem to hold Miss Russo's judgment in high regard? "Indeed, sir," he replied. "Was she treated with the respect she deserved?" A moment of stillness. "More than most men regard their possessions, sir." "Did he truly love her?" Margaret's lawyers protested vehemently. Yet Judge Pinkney permitted the inquiry. Sarah Yates cast a glance at Margaret Fairmont, then shifted her gaze to Celia, before finally staring down at her trembling hands. "I can't claim to understand love, sir, but I can tell you, he was not the same with her as he was with Mrs. Fairmont. More silent, as if he could finally find peace. Mrs. Fairmont was forever yearning for something, a renovation to the house, an invitation to embrace, a social gathering to partake in. Celia simply allowed him to exist as he truly was, I guess." The testimony shattered Margaret, leaving her visibly broken. The courtroom had been filled to the brim for weeks. Scandals such as this attracted throngs, even in the cold of winter, and the murmurs following Yates's testimony could be heard clearly, even over the sound of the judge's gavel. Yet, the most chilling account emerged from Dr. Robert Middleton, the doctor who cared for Augustus in the haunting days of his last illness. Middleton had been aware of the cancer for several months and, at Augustus's urging, had remained silent about the grim prognosis. Summoned to share his insights on Augustus's troubled mind, he found himself compelled to disclose the unsettling dialogues he'd engaged in with his patient. Colonel Fairmont felt the cold grip of death closing in around him. Middleton took the stand. He was acutely aware of his state and how it was evolving. He was fully aware. He was not hindered by lordom when we delved into his matters. He made it clear that he planned to take care of Celia and their little ones. Their offspring? Margaret's attorney sprang into action. He admitted to being the father right to your face. "He did," he uttered. Middleton hesitated, a palpable unease washing over him. He claimed to have brought 5 lives into the world, 3 with his wife and 2 with Celia. He confessed to having let down all 5 of them in various ways, yet he believed he could at least guarantee that Daniel and Ruth would escape unscathed. Did he show any worry for the well-being of his real children? He claimed they would gain the shield of their mother's name and the privileges that came with being white in Charleston. He was very particular about how that was worded. Just when the courtroom seemed to reach a peak of discomfort, Margaret's attorney posed the question that would shatter the case into chaos. Dr. Middleton, in your expert view, do you believe Colonel Fairmont's judgment was clouded by his illness or the medication he was taking? No. Did he appear to be in his right mind? Entirely. Then why, in your medical opinion, would a rational man of his stature engage in such an act of social and familial ruin? Middleton's gaze locked onto Margaret Fairmont. He shared another story with me. He confessed that he had spent his whole adult life bound by rules that forced him to conceal his true self and desires. He claimed that the society of the South required men such as himself to uphold two families, one that was visible to the world and another hidden away, while never admitting the reality of either existence. He confessed he was weary of deceit, that the thought of death sharpened his thoughts on truth, and that the most significant wrongdoing he had ever committed wasn't the affair with Celia. It was the act of acquiring her initially, possessing another person, and bringing children into a life of servitude. He declared that if the law refused to let him rectify that wrongdoing, then the law was far more tainted than he could ever be. The courtroom burst into chaos. Judge Pinckney had to break for 15 minutes to restore order. Margaret stepped out of the courthouse that day, encircled by her supporters, yet the harm had already taken root. Augustus's own doctor had testified that the will revealed not a lack of capacity, but a chilling moral clarity, that the man whom everyone believed they understood had, in truth, been ensnared in a web of deception that he had ultimately chosen to reveal. The testimony carved deep rifts in the fabric of Charleston society, extending far beyond the scandal of a single family. Men who had shared pews with Augustus, who had engaged in commerce alongside him, who had secretly juggled their own hidden families, now faced the chilling realization that perhaps he had been justified in speaking the truth. Women who had chosen to remain blissfully unaware of their husbands' actions found themselves grappling with unsettling questions about the realities lurking within their own homes. The case transformed from a singular will into a chilling reflection of the very fabric of Southern society, and then in the month of January, in the year 1858, an event occurred that altered the course of everything once more. Ruth Fairmont, Celia's young daughter of 10 years, succumbed to the grips of scarlet fever. The illness ravaged Charleston that winter, claiming the lives of countless children. Celia, driven by a mother's desperation to save her beloved daughter, sought out the finest physician she could find. Her wealth, drawn from the estate she managed, allowed her to pursue every possible avenue for help. Margaret's lawyers tried to claim that Celia shouldn't have used estate money for the medical care of a child who wasn't officially acknowledged. The debate presented in the courtroom was overwhelming, even for Charleston's capacity to accept moral inconsistencies. Judge Pinckney, visibly wrestling with his own inner demons, delivered a verdict that sent shockwaves through the courtroom. This young one is unwell. In his will, her father recognized her as his own flesh and blood. Whatever this court eventually decides about the distribution of Colonel Fairmont's estate, we will not allow a 10-year-old to die while lawyers argue about property rights. Miss Russo has the green light to tap into the estate funds for the child's medical care. It was the first time the court had recognized Ruth as a person rather than just a possession. It was a fissure in the protective shield that Margaret's team had painstakingly constructed. Ruth made it through, but the sickness had drained her strength. The compassion from the public for ailing children, paired with the doctor's insights into Augustus's intentions, started to quietly sway opinions in unexpected directions. Not among Charleston's elite, who clung to their power and the status quo, but among the everyday merchants, tradesmen, and small farmers who found themselves drawn into the chilling tale as they read about the case in the newspapers. These weren't individuals with bound souls to safeguard. They were individuals who could perceive the deep human sorrow hidden within the layers of legal jargon. By the spring of 1858, both sides were weary from the toll, both in wealth and in the fabric of society, of the relentless conflict. The estate's last few treasures were slowly being devoured by the relentless grip of legal fees. Margaret found herself trapped, compelled to rely on her brother's loans just to keep up the facade. Celia existed in a peculiar void, holding legal dominion over extensive lands, yet shunned so thoroughly by society that merchants turned away from any direct dealings with her. And then Thomas Grimaud took a step that pushed the case to its breaking point. On the 12th day of March in the year 1858, Grimball submitted a new motion that dramatically reshaped the entire case. Rather than merely standing up for Augustus's will, he took a bold stance, insisting on a complete reckoning of the Fairmont estate's management throughout Augustus's life. He specifically called for records detailing every property purchase, sale, and transfer, with a keen focus on acquisitions made after the year 1843. The movement appeared mechanical, yet its consequences were nothing short of terrifying. Grimaud had stumbled upon a dark secret hidden within Augustus's papers, and he was determined to wield it for his own sinister purposes. The hearing on the motion took place on the 20th of March. The courtroom buzzed with an unusual energy, packed to the brim as whispers of an impending revelation rippled through the crowd. Grimaud stepped forward with the poised intensity of someone who knew he had the upper hand. "Your Honor, the Fairmont family has contended during these proceedings that Miss Celia Russo was merely property, that she had no genuine connection with Colonel Fairmont, and that she possesses no legal right to inherit his estate. I wish to present a document discovered within the private papers of Colonel Fairmont." He clutched a piece of paper, worn and meticulously safeguarded. "This is a manumission document executed in Savannah, Georgia, on the 3rd day of April in the year 1847, a decade prior to Colonel Fairmont's demise. It grants freedom to Celia, a woman of color who was around 28 years old, in recognition of her loyal service and other significant contributions. Oh, the document is properly notarized and filed with the Chatham County Courthouse in Savannah." The stillness in the courtroom was suffocating. Margaret's face turned as pale as a ghost. Grimaud pressed on, his voice growing more powerful. "This document was signed on the day Ruth Fairmont came into the world, the second daughter of Colonel Fairmont and Miss Russo. According to the law, a child born to a free woman is considered free, no matter the status of the father. Ruth Fairmont was never a captive. She has been legally free since the day she was born." He allowed that to settle in the air before striking again. "Additionally, I possess a second document that was executed in Charleston on the 15th of June, 1844, 3 days after the birth of Daniel Fairmont. This document, also a manuscript of liberation, grants freedom to Celia and her infant son Daniel under similar terms." Simmons, Margaret's lead attorney, stood up, tension radiating from him. Disagreement. These documents had never seen the light of day before. "These documents were hidden by Colonel Fairmont," Grimble said with an unsettling calmness, for he understood that revealing them to the world would put his children in peril. "A woman of color, living freely in South Carolina, finds herself in a fragile legal situation. Her children, though legally free, remained vulnerable to the dark fate of being taken and sold away. It was easier for everyone to think that Celia and her children remained in chains, even though freedom had been theirs for more than 10 years. Judge Pinkney leaned forward, his expression somber and intense. "So, you're telling me that Miss Russo has been legally free since 1847 and her son since 1844. I have more to express than just that, Your Honor. For 13 long years, Colonel Augustus Fairmont upheld the illusion that Celia belonged to him, all the while concealing the truth that he had set her free. He acted not from a place of malice, but from a desire to shield. He realized that a liberated woman of color, with children who appeared white, would be in danger. Yet the truth of the matter is unmistakable. Celia Russo has been lost to the shadows for more than 10 years. She has been a liberated soul dwelling within the confines of the Fairmont household." The implications tumbled through the courtroom, each one triggering the next like a chain of falling dominoes. If Celia had been free, her relationship with Augustus would have transcended the bounds of master and slave, becoming something entirely different. If her children had been born free, they were not mere possessions, but rightful heirs. If Augustus had been secretly safeguarding them beneath the guise of enslavement while truly having liberated them years prior, then his final will wasn't a last-minute act of conscience, but rather the climax of a decade-long scheme. Margaret discovered her voice, and it was torn with rage and anguish. He liberated her from the darkness. He liberated her on the day our little girl came into the world. As I lay in the throes of childbirth, teetering on the edge of life and death to bring forth another child, he was at the courthouse, liberating his mistress from the shackles of the law. The deep sorrow in her voice hushed even those who felt for her plight. Here was the true scar exposed. Not merely that Augustus had strayed, but that he had been scheming for Celia's future while Margaret brought their children into the world. That he had wielded the law like a shield for one family, while letting the other cling to a false sense of safety. Grimball seized the upper hand. Your Honor, in light of these new findings, I respectfully request that this court acknowledge Miss Russo's status as a free woman. Furthermore, I assert that Colonel Fairmont's will was not a manumission, but rather a testamentary transfer of property between two free individuals, a right he was fully entitled to exercise. The deer rights still apply. Simmons pleaded with a sense of urgency. Mrs. Fairmont remained shielded by legal protections that the will honors. Grimball responded with a chilling retort. Mrs. Fairmont receives her 1/3 share, as mandated by the law. The rest of the estate is bequeathed to Miss Russo, just as it would have been if Colonel Fairmont had designated his belongings to any other individual with freedom. Judge Pinkney announced a break in the proceedings. The courtroom emptied at a snail's pace, each person lingering in a daze, grappling with the shocking truths that had just been unveiled. Margaret departed, her children by her side. Her expression, a haunting reflection of despair. Celia sat there, frozen in place, as the shadows crept closer around her. Daniel stood next to her, both grappling with the chilling truth that had just come to light. "Dear mother," Daniel whispered softly, "have you heard about the manumission papers?" Celia shook her head, a shiver creeping down her spine. "He whispered to me that they were real. He urged me to place my faith in him, yet I never laid eyes on them." I believe her voice shattered. "He seemed to understand that if I truly thought I was free, my actions would change entirely, and that could place us all in peril. It felt more secure to convince myself that I remained in chains, to play the part of the bound, to never question the illusion. He shielded us by ensnaring us in our own chains." The torment of Augustus's actions weighed heavily on the mind, a darkness that seemed to seep into every corner of his being. He had liberated the woman he cherished, yet condemned her to exist as mere possession. He had made certain that his children entered the world unshackled, yet he nurtured them within the confines of bondage. He had built a complex facade of legal protection while putting on a convincing act of control. Each gesture of affection carried with it a shadow of torment. Each safeguard became a prison. The court reconvened a fortnight later for Judge Pinkney's ruling. He was clearly tormented by the choice he had to make. His written opinion stretched across 4 unsettling pages, brimming with legal reasoning that sought to navigate the treacherous waters of law, precedent, and the moral abyss the case had unveiled. His core discovery was limited yet utterly destructive to Margaret's case. The manumission documents were indeed valid. Celia had tasted freedom since the year 1847. Her children had known it since the moment they entered the world. Thus, Augustus's will was merely the passing of property from one free individual to another, a process permitted by South Carolina law, albeit with the constraints of dea rights. Margaret received her 1/3 share of the real property for the duration of her life, but Celia received control of 2/3 of the real estate, all of the personal property, the business interests, and the cash assets. What truly mattered was that she finally gained the legal acknowledgement of her identity. She was not an object. She had not been in her rightful place for more than 10 years. She was a liberated woman of color, holding the same rights to inherit and possess property as any free individual under the laws of South Carolina. The choice was swiftly challenged in the South Carolina Court of Appeals. Yet the appeals court chose not to take up the case, allowing Pinkney's ruling to remain intact. The struggle in the courtroom had finally come to an end. After a year and a half, countless thousands of dollars spent on legal fees, and the unearthing of secrets that Charleston would have rather kept hidden, Celia Russo had emerged victorious. Yet, when victory finally arrived, it felt empty in ways that no one had truly foreseen. Celia claimed the trade. Margaret, embracing her right, decided to stay in her home. The law granted her that choice, and she relished the dark pleasure of compelling Celia to acknowledge her existence. For 2 years, the two women lived in the same house, barely speaking, each occupying different floors, each the victim and villain of the other's tale. The setup became a haunting burden for all who were entangled in it. Margaret's children shunned the idea of visiting as long as Celia resided there. The Charleston Society turned its back on any gathering that could possibly bring together both women. The household staff lived in a state of perpetual unease, never quite sure whom to follow when commands clashed. In the year 1860, Margaret finally surrendered. She relocated to her brother's plantation deep in the heart of the land, bringing along the sole possession she cherished from her marriage, the title of Augustus, Fairmont's widow. She would live another 32 years, passing away in 1892, and she never uttered her husband's name again in public. Catherine never wed her. She resided with her mother until the tragic day of Margaret's passing, after which she relocated to Columbia to stay with her cousins. She offered piano lessons to support herself and passed away in 1901, destitute yet dignified. Augustus Jr. tried to carve out his own path in the cotton business, yet the shadow of his father's reputation loomed over him. Hardly any planters would engage in trade with the offspring of the man who had turned his back on his white family for the sake of his enslaved lover. He relocated to Texas in the year 1865 following the war, and vanished from the pages of history. Whispers from old family letters hint at a death in the 1800s, yet the grave remains elusive, shrouded in mystery. Young Mag tied the knot in 1862, right before the war turned everything upside down. Her husband was a young officer who met his fate at Gettysburg. She never found love again and spent her days as a governess until she passed away in 1909. The Civil War shattered the remnants of the Fairmont estate. The Union troops had taken over Riverside. The fields were engulfed in flames. The primary dwelling was turned upside down. The Charleston townhouse bore the scars of relentless shelling. The business interests crumbled alongside the Confederacy. By 1865, the immense wealth that had sparked such fierce conflict had vanished, swallowed by the brutality that ripped the South asunder. Yet, against all odds, Celia and her children emerged from the darkness unscathed. They departed from Charleston in the year 1860, foreseeing the impending disaster that loomed ahead. Celia, with the last of the estate's liquid assets, ventured into the heart of Philadelphia. Seeking refuge in a neighborhood where free people of color had woven a tapestry of community amidst the shadows of a haunting past, she poured her savings into a boarding house nestled within a quaint little shop, seeking out humble ventures that promised a reliable stream of income. Daniel was given an education. He learnt the trade of carpentry and carved out a reputation as a master craftsman. He wed in 1868, fathered children, and witnessed the dawn of the 20th century. He passed away in 1921, having lived 57 years as a free man, and his grandchildren inherited the property he had gathered over the years. Ruth emerged from the shadows of her childhood illness, transforming into a young woman marked by an extraordinary strength that defied the darkness. She took on the role of a teacher, guiding and nurturing the minds of freed children in the tumultuous times of Reconstruction. In the year 1870, she took the hand of a minister in marriage. Her descendants spread throughout Philadelphia, New York, and Boston, transforming into teachers, doctors, and lawyers, crafting lives that would have been unimaginable in the world of her origin. Celia's life stretched on until the year 1889. She never took a second chance at love. She held on to the gold locket Augustus had gifted her, cherishing it until her last breath. Within the confines of that space lay two tiny photographs, one capturing Daniel in his infancy, the other showcasing Ruth in her early childhood. She lay beneath the earth in Eden Cemetery, Philadelphia, in a plot she had chosen for herself, marked by a headstone that bore the words, Celia Russo, Fairmont, 1819 to 1889, free. The tale of Fairmont against Fairmont Estate never found its way into the usual legal tomes. It lingered in the shadows of property law discussions, often relegated to the dim corners of footnotes. The specifics were far too unsettling, the consequences far too disturbing. The Society of Charleston chose to erase the entire grim incident, burying it beneath the more theatrical sorrow of the Civil War. Yet, the case documents endured. Countless pages of testimony, motions, and evidence have been recorded and filed in the Charleston County Courthouse. They endured the ravages of war, weathered the flames and torrents, and withstood efforts to erase their shameful past. Within those pages, captured in formal language and sworn accounts, lies the tale of a man who sought to amend an injustice he had upheld for years, only to find that his quest for redemption led to the ruin of two families, while he endeavored to save just one. The enquiries that the case brought forth were left unanswered, lingering in the shadows of uncertainty. Was Augustus Fairmont a hero for attempting to rescue his children, or a villain for having enslaved them to begin with? Was Celia a victim of relentless oppression, or a figure who thrived in the shadows of power? Was Margaret right to feel such rage, Or was she merely protecting a system that cannot be defended? Was there any chance that any of them could have made a different choice, given the dark limitations of their reality? The reality, as the past reveals, is that all those entangled were ensnared in a web that tainted every bond it encountered. Augustus's struggle to be truthful in a world woven with deceit revealed just how deeply those falsehoods had tainted every aspect of life. In the shadows of a family, where law intertwines with property, love flickers like a candle in the dark, and parenthood looms with both joy and dread, his will failed to mend what was shattered. It laid bare the shattered pieces of it all. Ultimately, the Fairmont case revealed a haunting truth about the fragility of the entire Southern social order, leaving a chilling legacy that echoed through time. A system that demanded men to possess their own offspring was doomed to fail. A community founded on the false belief that certain individuals were less than human could not endure. The Civil War would come 3 years after Judge Pinckney's ruling, and it would consume the legal frameworks that allowed cases like Fairmont's to exist. Yet, it would be another 100 years before the heirs of individuals such as Celia and Daniel could truly seize the rights that Augustus Fairmont perished striving to bestow upon them. And even now, the whispers of those systems, the beliefs about power, property, and who is worthy of what, linger hauntingly in the shadows of the landscape he abandoned. The Fairmont Plantation House looms, its partially restored facade whispering tales of the past, now serving as a museum that invites the curious to explore its haunted history. Now, the guides share tales of the architecture, the furnishings, and the notable figures who once walked these halls. Occasionally, whispers of the contentious will drift through conversations, but they are often brushed aside, like shadows in the night. They seldom delve into the unsettling truths that lie beneath the surface of Charleston's opulent facade. Yet, within the dusty confines of the courthouse archives, the case file lingers, patiently awaiting a curious soul to retrieve it from the shadows and uncover the chilling testimony of a world that fought fiercely to conceal its dark secrets. What are your thoughts on this tale? Did Augustus Fairmont discover salvation in his last moments? Or did he simply deepen his sins with yet another act of cruelty, making 3 families bear the cost of his entire life of cowardice? Share your thoughts in the space provided below. If this historical mystery captivated you, consider subscribing to Faith and Mystery for more chilling tales from America's darkest chapters. Tap that notification bell and pass this video along to someone who values the intricate, sometimes unsettling realities woven into our past. The past is rarely as straightforward as we wish it could be. At times, the most chilling tales are those that unfolded in reality.